So, we're about to dive into a story that spans thousands of years. It's the incredible journey of India's knowledge systems. And trust me, it's a real drama. We're talking about ancient glory, a massive disruption, and then a really fascinating modern comeback.
Okay, take a look at this. These are the ruins of Nalanda University. Now, I want you to just imagine for a second. Long before you'd ever hear of Oxford or Cambridge, this was one of the world's intellectual hotspots. I mean, we're talking about a place that drew the smartest people from all over. From Greece, China, Persia, they all came here.
And this wasn't just about abstract philosophy. This system literally gave the world things we used every single day. The concept of zero, the decimal system, even super complex surgical procedures that were written down in ancient texts. But, and this is the real tragedy of the story, this incredibly advanced system was systematically dismantled. It was almost completely wiped out.
So, to really understand what was lost, we've got to go back to the beginning. Let's start with Act 1, the amazing legacy of ancient Indian knowledge. All right, so the whole thing was built on these really deep philosophical pillars. You've got the Vedas, the Upanishads, and 6 major schools of thought that dug into everything from logic to ethics. But here's the key thing to get. Knowledge, what they called Atma Vidya, wasn't about cramming for a test. No, it was about self-realization. And it was all fueled by this amazing culture of inquiry, a tradition of always asking questions. And all of this thinking and questioning, well, it led to something huge. The world's first great residential universities. Places like Takshashila and Nalanda were just massive. Think about it. They taught over 60 different subjects, everything from medicine and math to how to run a country and create art. These were, without a doubt, the global hubs for learning back then.
And the stuff that came out of this system? Absolutely staggering. I mean, this table just gives you the highlights, but really think about the impact. The concept of zero, that wasn't just a new number, it was a total revolution in math and philosophy that, is the foundation for every computer we use today. Or how about Sushruta's surgical techniques? So advanced for their time. We're talking about procedures that West wouldn't see for centuries. This wasn't just learning, it was world-changing innovation.
So the big question is, what went wrong? How did this incredible ecosystem just fall apart? Well, that brings us right into Act 2, the colonial disruption. And right here, you can see this massive clash of worldviews. On one side, you have the traditional Gurukul system, which was all about holistic development, mind, body, and spirit. But then the British system came in, and it had a totally different goal, just churn out clerks and administrators to run the empire. And you know what the biggest casualty was? That spirit of critical inquiry? It was totally replaced by rote memorization, all for a job.
And this timeline, this pinpoints the exact moment it all changed. The year was 1835. That's when Thomas Macaulay's Minute on Education basically made English the only language that mattered. But listen, this was so much more than just a language switch. It was a deliberate policy to push out indigenous knowledge, to call things like Ayurveda unscientific. It was a total delegitimization.
And the fallout from that? It was huge. As you can see here, English basically became the only ticket to a good job, to moving up in the world. What that did was create this massive disconnect. You had generations of Indians who were completely cut off from their own incredible intellectual heritage.
But, okay, the story doesn't end there, not by a long shot. This is where things start to turn around. In Act 3, after India gets its independence in 1947, you see this incredible drive to build a new scientific identity, literally from the ground up. It was all about reclaiming a spot on the world stage.
And that led to the creation of these new powerhouses of learning. I'm talking about world-class institutions like the IITs and ISRO. And these weren't just schools or agencies. They were a massive statement. They symbolized a new focus on modern science and technology. And boy, did they deliver. They became the bedrock for India's amazing achievements in things like space tech and IT.
But all this success brought up a really interesting question. Okay, so now India has this solid, modern scientific base and a ton of confidence. So, what about its own ancient roots? How could it start to reconnect with those very knowledge systems that had been pushed aside for so long?
And that question leads us right into our 4th act, which honestly is the most exciting part because it's happening as we speak. This is the modern IKS renaissance.
So what's kicking this all into high gear? A lot of it comes down to the National Education Policy of 2020. This is a game-changing policy. It literally calls for an education system that's rooted in Indian ethos and says, hey, we need to integrate these Indian knowledge systems into all levels of education.
And look, this isn't just some vague suggestion. This number right here, 5%, this is the real deal. It's the percentage of credits that must come from IKS courses in higher education. Now, 5% might not sound like a lot, but its impact is huge. It forces every university to take this seriously and actually make it part of a student's education.
So, what does this actually look like in the real world? This is where it gets super interesting. We're seeing these amazing bridges being built between ancient concepts and modern practices. So, for example, the holistic health ideas from Ayurveda, they're becoming a key part of integrative medicine. That deep one-on-one mentorship you saw in the Gurukul system, people are realizing it looks a lot like the modern PhD supervisor model. See, it's not about throwing out the new for the old, it's about connecting them.
So how are they making all this happen? Well, it's basically a three-part plan. First, they're using technology, digitizing everything and getting it online so anyone can access it. Second, they're backing it with actual money, funding new research into these areas. And third, and this might be the most crucial part, they're training a whole new generation of teachers who can actually connect these dots for students.
Okay, so let's wrap this up with our final act and look to the future. What does all of this mean for India's knowledge systems going forward?
Now, it's really important to get this straight. This isn't about just going back to the good old days. That's not the goal at all. It's about creating something new, a synthesis that looks forward. It's about taking the unique insights from ancient wisdom and applying them to solve the massive challenges we face today, like sustainability and public health.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. As this blending of old and new gets deeper, this story stops being just about India, right? It kind of becomes a potential model for the rest of the world. So the question for all of us is, how can this unique mix of ancient wisdom and modern science help us create a better, more sustainable, and truly innovative future for everyone?